John Wick, Chapter 3, Parabellum, out in cinemas now, latest entry in the action movie series. And before I get into this film itself, I do want to talk briefly about the series and its background. So, the original John Wick came out in 2014 and it was an instant revelation, which is surprising if you think about the premise of the film. So, the basic story is that a former assassin comes out of retirement to take vengeance on the people who wronged him. Now that does sound like a premise of a Steven Seagal movie, the kind that you find on the bottom of the DVD basket in a supermarket. So what did John Wick do to make itself different? Well, first off, the people behind the film, including the director, Chad Stahelski, are in large part professional stuntsmen and stunts coordinators. So they are professionals at making action good and also look good. So they set out to create a movie which is not just action itself that is excellently performed, but you can see it. So it's shown really clearly on the screen. Now, if you take a look at some of the other action films nowadays in Hollywood, you'll find that very often scenes are shot with shaky camera, with really weird camera angles from behind the actor to hide the fact that he's not as competent or the fact that it's actually a stunt double performing. Those action sequences will often have very quick cuts to, again, hide the fact that the action isn't actually that great. The imperfections of the choreography and the fact that the actors themselves are often not even in the scene. So John Wick's creators sort of went against that, wanted to have none of that, none of this stuff. They wanted to proudly display their well-directed sequences and fights and shootouts with absolutely no room for compromise. So wide camera angles, placing the cam in front of the actor, not behind them, and long uninterrupted takes. Now, that's an ambitious plan, but you do run into a problem straight off the bat. So who do you cast as the main character? Because remember, we're talking about a professional assassin here, right? So we need to make the action look good. And most of the Hollywood big names, they're pretty much not trained well enough to perform on this level, to portray that role convincingly, especially when it comes to martial arts and handling guns. On the other hand, if you just stick to using professional stuntsmen as your actors, then this will be a nobody in the mind of the general audience. So the people won't know the actor, they won't go to see the movie. It will be a nightmare to market. Enter Keanu Reeves. Now, if you asked me about Keanu Reeves about 8 to 10 years ago, I would tell you that he's a wooden, uninteresting actor, and despite Matrix being a classic, he's really not that great. If you ask me now, I am going to say that he's a wooden, uninteresting actor, yes, but he is dedicated. And I've actually changed my mind about him a lot after reading about his work ethic and how he approaches movies. So basically, yes, he is a bit wooden when it comes to facial expressions and delivering his lines. But one, he's very competent at choosing roles which maybe not require that, because if you think about it, he really worked well in Matrix, despite not being very emotive. And that's also a perfect description of an assassin, right? John Wick. So we've got our fit. And then Keanu, what he does is he's really dedicated when it comes to preparation. He will go out of his way to learn all of this stuff to be able to perform at the highest level. I've learned that he actually trained to become adept at martial arts for Matrix already, so he already had a background in that. And for John Wick, he prepared extensively in terms of using guns and shooting them to make it look realistic. You can actually find videos on YouTube of him doing that, and it's pretty impressive. So you have the main problem solved. But then there's also one crucial component to the success of the film, and in my opinion, that was the framing of the story and the main character. So again, if you take a look at other action at other action films in cinema, like the Bruce Willis films, the Steven Seagal films, the main character is often an underdog. He is outgunned, outmanned, and he has to face overwhelming odds to take his revenge or do whatever he wants to do. His enemies know that they are stronger than him, and they often underestimate him. So again, the creators of John Wick kind of flipped that entire premise. So John Wick is an unstoppable killing machine. He's a force of nature, God's reckoning, and his enemies know that from minute one, and they are terrified of him, and you can see that. And that's actually another strength of the film, the way it shows that. It explains to us who Wick is, not through him, but through other people's reactions to him. And that is brilliant, and it creates this mythos around the character. And about mythos, there's also one other layer to the story, which has to do with the secret society of assassins, with their own hotels and services and even currency, which is also never 100% explained to us. We just witness this on the screen with the constant feeling of what the hell is going on here. And that feeling of mystery, that sense of mystery, only makes it way more cooler, all of this stuff. So all of those factors combined, and the result was a terrific piece of cinema. It's now a modern classic of action films, and I personally loved everything about it. The action, the dialogue, the story, the cinematography, the background characters, the music, the pacing of the film. In fact, the first John Wick, I would say, remains one of the very, very few films that I consider perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing about them. I don't know how you could improve it. Then the sequel came out, and while I thought it wasn't as magnificent as the original, I thought that, for example, some of the sharpness and focus of the original was sacrificed for much more world building related to the secret assassin stuff. And I thought that the more you removed the mystery about those things, the duller it became, the less cool it becomes. However, Chapter 2 was still a very, very solid movie, and the action was kept at the highest level. And I actually know at least a couple of people who do prefer the sequel to the original, so whatever floats your boat. Anyway, now we come into the latest entry in the series, and the film begins almost exactly where the last one ended, which, without too many spoilers, John is now on the run from the other assassins. He's being chased, he's being hunted down, and he has to escape. So the main question about the film for me going into the movie theater was, how good is it going to be? Because I knew there's probably a very small chance that it's going to suck completely, but how good exactly is this going to be compared especially to the previous two? Is it going to capture the flawlessness and the magnificence of the first one? Or is it going to be more like the other one, where it's still very much solid but doesn't have quite the same grip? Or maybe the formula is starting to run out after 3 films and it will be even worse. So I'll start off with saying that it's not a perfect film in my book, and I do have some criticisms of it, and they relate mostly to the second act of the film, because in it the main story really slows down for a significant period of time. There's very little action. We go more into the world building and the progress of the story itself through dialogue, and I think that the pacing suffers for it, especially as we also get a subplot. Apart from the main John Wick stuff, we get a subplot about all the supporting characters and what happens in the background of the story itself. And I thought that also dragged the movie down a little bit. However, all of this is actually a setup to what comes next. And when the movie uses that setup and it gets going, oh my god, it just doesn't stop. Once again, the action is just some of the best stuff I've ever seen. We've got one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat, and we have gunfights with dozens of people at the same time. We have confined small spaces, and we have large open corridors or even courtyards outside of buildings. We have knife fights, gunfights, shootouts, chases, horses, dogs. Everything is in it. It's almost over the top, but there is enough humor, and the movie knows what it is and treats itself lightly enough that it doesn't go just too much over the top. It doesn't treat itself too seriously. And all of these action sequences, these fights, they're brutal and visceral, and they feel real, and in terms of pace they are almost relentless. Outside of the already mentioned middle part, I think that the film almost doesn't leave you room to breathe. And it's also a technical marvel, in my opinion. We get to enjoy all of this stuff in all its glory thanks to the long, wide shots of the camera. It's impossible not to appreciate the choreography of the fight and the set pieces. Music is once again an excellent contributor to the movie's quality. There's one sequence towards the end where a fight is almost completely synced with the music, and I just couldn't help but smile like a madman watching it. It was just so brilliant. So, to summarize this somehow, I think that Parabellum is definitely more uneven than the original and maybe even than the second. It has deeper lows, but at the end of the day, I think it doesn't matter in the slightest because when it hits its highs, no other action film comes close.